will be talking about my mostly frustrated efforts to collect narrative games in an academic library context. So over the next 20 or so minutes, I will try to answer exhaustively and comprehensively these 4 questions. So I'll start with just a brief intro to who I am and why someone in library information science would be interested in this, sort of provide some context about why currently academic libraries are not actively collecting narrative games. Consider, why does it matter if they aren't doing it when it is happening in the IF community already? And then if I can convince you that it does matter that academic libraries should be doing this work as well, then how can we go about doing that now if I started to go about trying to do that? So I will start by briefly introducing myself. So I am an assistant professor in library information science at UNC Greensboro. And if this is the first that you are hearing about library information science as an academic discipline, I think I can probably forgive you. It's a bit obscure, but basically what we do is train librarians, archivists, folks entering different types of cultural heritage institutions to do the work of organizing and providing access to complex collections of information, and increasingly thinking about that kind of work outside of libraries and archives as well. So my own research is on preserving digital art and literature, both in libraries as well as in creative communities. And like I mentioned, trying to sort of identify places of collaboration at the intersection of the institutions sort of formally doing this work and the creative communities that are often very actively involved in preserving their own work outside of those institutional contexts. So I myself am not a librarian. I just play one on TV, but I do work with, in the context of this project, and working closely with librarians at Jackson Library, which is the main campus library at UNC Greensboro. And I'll be talking about the work going on there to start collecting some narrative games in the sort of second half of my presentation. So why are academic libraries not actively collecting narrative games? And to kind of answer that question, I need to provide some history about how academic libraries sort of used to collect narrative games along with other types of software. So if we sort of go back into the literature, the library information science literature, we can see lots of examples of librarians in the 80s and 90s during the sort of start of the personal computer era, talking about the importance of collecting software of all different types, from sort of productivity software to, of course, things like games. So there were publications dedicated to reviewing software for libraries to collect, and lots of active scholarly and professional discussion about what to collect, how to collect it, how to describe it, how to provide access to it. So this was an area where there was a lot of discussion, and as I'll talk about in the challenges for collecting current types of software, the move away from the physical distribution of software on floppies and CD-ROMs toward digital distribution and downloading from online sources is really the main culprit to this. The fact that CDs and floppies sort of have the same relative shape, size, price point as other types of library resources like books and CDs and DVDs and things like that, facilitated the collection into libraries. And now that by and large, narrative games, along with other types of video games generally, have moved away from the kind of physical distribution model, is really the key challenge to why it's difficult for libraries to collect games now. So one example of games and digital literature that libraries have collected extensively are the Eastgate Catalog. So if you're not familiar, Eastgate published lots of early hypertext literature through the 90s and 2000s. And in sort of some related research I've been doing, I've been tracking where these CD-ROMs and floppies still exist in academic libraries. So as you can see, this is an example of Shelley Jackson's Patchwork Girl in the Jackson Library on UNCG's campus. And it's treated very much like a book, right? So it's packaged like a book, checked out like a book, and the sort of form factor that it is essentially the same shape and size of a book kind of facilitates its integration into these workflows for collecting, describing, and providing access to books. So just a little brief window into that research. I've identified over 1,000 copies of Eastgate titles in academic institutions around the world, although primarily in the United States. But this is sort of a testament to the fact that these titles were collected extensively through the 90s and 2000s, and sort of raises a question about why similar types of titles being released now aren't collected by academic libraries. So Infocom maybe would land better with this crowd than Eastgate. I haven't done a similar exhaustive search for Infocom titles in academic libraries, although that's something that I would be interested in doing in research moving forward once I get done with the Eastgate project. But just some preliminary searching does turn up some Infocom titles across libraries. So for instance, University of Notre Dame has a handful of Infocom titles, and I think they're not currently available because they're in the process of being moved. Some sort of surface level research about why those titles weren't currently available. I think they're being moved from one part of the library to another. But these are titles that are collected in the library. Another example of the Lost Treasures of Infocom disc that is held at a few libraries around the world. So just as a quick example, catalog records for the holdings of the Lost Treasures of Infocom at University of California, Santa Cruz, and the University of Toronto. So as an example of the types of titles that I think academic libraries should be collecting now are things like choice of games, things made with Twine. These are titles that have ties to literature, have a clear literary and artistic merit. So for instance, The Road to Canterbury by Kate Hartfield has been recognized by receiving a nomination for a Nebula Award, right? So we can make the same sorts of cases for why an academic library would be interested in collecting titles like Road to Canterbury as we would Shelley Jackson's Patchwork Girl, right? I mean, they both have this sort of literary context, have clear applications to why different classes might be interested in it, why different applications for research and study. But as you see, so a lot of the data that I'm pulling about where these titles are held, just as a kind of brief note, is from WorldCat, which is the largest global database of bibliographic data maintained by OCLC, a library nonprofit. So it's sort of the not totally complete, but it is the most complete global database of library holdings. And as you see, there is a catalog record for Road to Canterbury. Someone has cataloged it, although very poorly. So just comparing the info page from the Choice of Games site to the catalog, you can see, like, right, there is an author, there are different people involved, there's information about this game easily available, but it's not captured in the catalog record, right? So for instance, the author is not appropriately cited. And also, you'll see that there is not actually any copies that are held in libraries, at least not listed in library catalogs. So there are a few current, recent narrative games that are held by some libraries. So for instance, 80 Days by Inkle is held in the University of Michigan library. Out there, another recent narrative game is held again at the University of Michigan library. So to get this information, I did searches in WorldCat for narrative games, interactive fiction, some different queries like that, and basically just found a handful of games that were published in the last 10, 15 years that are in WorldCat and in academic library collections. And the sort of one exception to this rule of academic libraries not collecting narrative games is the University of Michigan library. They have this computer and video game archive with lots and lots of historical titles, but also they've been actively collecting more recent releases as well, things that are released through Steam and other online distribution platforms. So does it matter that libraries aren't collecting narrative games? So the sort of issue that I've just been pointing to is, right, libraries used to collect significant narrative games, things from Eastgate, things from Infocom, but they're not collecting those games, the sort of current corollaries to those games now, right? They're not collecting things from Choice of Games. They're not collecting things from these other comparable publishers, not to mention all of the games that are self-published and released through things like itch. So does it matter that libraries aren't currently doing this work that they used to be doing? So for instance, right, we have things that you all are very, very familiar with, services and systems maintained by the interactive fiction community doing this work of cataloging the games, providing access to the games, and documenting the history of these games, right? So we've got IFDB, we have the Interactive Fiction Archive, right? So if this work is already being done by the community, is there a need for academic libraries to be doing this? And if so, why? So there's sort of a few reasons that I would pose for a both-and approach for academic libraries to be complementing the work that's already being done very well by the interactive fiction community itself already. So one main reason is circulating these games among different communities, right? So not to say that the AF community is insular, but it is serving people that are already in that community, right? And having these games cataloged and circulating through academic libraries just has a potential to introduce these games to a wider community of people that aren't already in the know about interactive fiction. Another reason I would propose is, of course, supporting research and teaching with narrative games. And we just heard a great case study of that in the previous presentation, right? Using games as part of a musicology class. There's a wide range of applications for games across the humanities, social sciences, information science, of course, where I'm coming from. So, lots and lots of reasons why students and faculty in their own research and in classroom settings would be interested in integrating these games and having the library collect them and make them available for those purposes. And then finally, I think collecting these in a library and cataloging them in a library catalog places narrative games in a broader cultural heritage context. So the IFBB, the Interactive Fiction Archive, right, these systems do a great job of providing the context for these games within the interactive fiction canon and history, but the benefit of having these things in a library catalog is that we then get them connected to other types of literature that aren't interactive fiction, right? So Patrick Earl, again, is a great example of this, being a kind of imaginative retelling of the Frankenstein story. And there are things in a library catalog, like subject headings, that connect this particular work to other retellings of Frankenstein or other feminist fiction, things like that. So by having these things cataloged in a library catalog, we get to make those connections between narrative games and other types of literature throughout history. So if I have convinced you that we should be doing this in academic libraries as well as in the interactive fiction community, what should we do? So I will share a little bit about what I have been doing to try and jumpstart this at my library at UNCG. So I have been working with the librarians at the Digital Media Commons, which is part of the library that provides access to different creative technologies, digital creative technologies. They have a podcast studio. They have all the different types of digital creative suites that you would expect, Adobe and all that kind of stuff. They also have a VR setup as well as a gaming studio setup. So I've been working with them to expand upon the collection of sort of mainstream games for PlayStation, Xbox, and that kind of stuff, to also include narrative games. So most of the VR games that they have, so most of the non-console games they have are these VR games, and then there's a very slim selection of sort of things that are other, so not console games and not VR games. So this collecting has been driven by a couple of professors in the religious studies department, who I'll mention at the close of the presentation, who have been working on integrating games in their own classes, as well as starting a research network of folks at UNCG interested in teaching and doing research with games. So one of the major things that I am addressing is these console games that have been collected, because they're collected on physical media and can be checked out and that kind of stuff. Those have been included in the catalog. Those do have a dedicated catalog record, but these new sort of other games that don't fit the console games category have not currently been cataloged in the library catalog. So that really inhibits our ability to access them as students and faculty, to know that the library has these available, but also sort of doesn't take advantage of all the other things that a library catalog can do, like providing broader context for the work. So for instance, Elder Scrolls Skyrim has a catalog record, right? You can see that it's available in the Digital Media Commons. But if you do a search for That Dragon Cancer, even though we do have it on a computer in the gaming lab that students and faculty can access, it doesn't show up as being held by our library because it hasn't been actively cataloged yet. So the project that I've been working on is to address this issue by collecting a sort of foundational set of more recent narrative games. I've been focusing on choice of games titles because that is interesting to me. I'm interested in choice-based games. I'm also interested in having students make their own games based on playing these published games. So the fact that choice of games makes choice script available for free for people to use on their own is a compelling reason to collect those games. And because they do have the sort of very explicit literary bent that makes them a good fit for an academic library, and because they responded to my email when I emailed a bunch of publishers to ask about collecting narrative games, and they were very accommodating and worked with me to acquire some of these titles for our collection. I'll also shout out that Inkle donated a Steam keys for a couple of their games, and then as a result of this talk being on the schedule, Thumped Studios reached out and also donated a Steam key for Magnificent Truffle Pig. So if anyone else, any publishers out there want to donate games to our collection, that would be much appreciated. So my goal, and this is what I'm working on right now, and I'll be doing full on once the fall semester gets going. We currently have all of these games available to play in the Digital Media Commons on a dedicated computer that has the DMC's Steam account on it, but they're not currently in the catalog. So my goal for this fall is to create catalog records for all of these games, so that if someone searched for, Throw It to Canterbury in our catalog, it would show we do have a copy of it, and you can access it in the Digital Media Commons. So that's sort of the workaround that I've gotten right now. Having a dedicated computer in the DMC with the library Steam account, so that you can play these games in the library. My dream, though, is to sort of provide access to any of these games through the library catalog on the library user's personal machine, right? So they would see the catalog record, and they would see a record for a game in the catalog, and after being authenticated as a UNCG library user, they'd be able to click that link and get immediate access to that game on their computer, similar to how ebooks are distributed, streaming films are distributed. If the library has a copy of an ebook, a student or faculty can click on the link to the ebook and get it on their local machine. But there are some obstacles in the way of my dream. So one of the main obstacles is the fact that Steam is the sort of default distribution system, especially for published narrative games. And the library is just very wary of sort of Steam as a vendor, and the system for site licensing for Steam, the sort of Steam Cafe system, is not really set up to work with libraries. So I think developing some better sort of site license for Steam would make this possible, or sort of contribute to this dream. But as it's currently set up, our library does not want to use Steam in that way. So we're sort of just limited to providing local access in the library on a dedicated computer to anything that we acquire through Steam. Of course, there are lots of games, especially in the narrative game community, interactive fiction community, that are released through other distribution platforms like itch. Many of them that are sort of available for free or for some nominal fee to play online. And I would be interested in, and that's one of the things I'm trying to fight for, is sort of setting up licensing agreements with individual creators so that the library could, say, acquire one of these titles and then provide access to it through a web browser or by clicking on a link in the library catalog and having an authenticated user download it to their local machine. But that is sort of a difficult thing to do right now for not necessarily technical reasons, but more for bureaucratic and administrative reasons, that I've been trying to run this idea by folks at the library, and they're just sort of see it as overly complicated and not wanting to explore the sort of licensing framework of licensing things from individual creators. So the library not really being open to new modes of collecting is also a major impediment and challenge to this. And it's sort of puzzling because there are lots of energy and lots of initiatives on campus for working with games. So like I mentioned, this network for the cultural study of video gaming that was initiated by these folks in the religious studies department is building up capacity, and UNCG just opened a new state-of-the-art esports arena on campus. So clearly there is energy on campus for games, and I would like to see the library respond to that by thinking about new ways of collecting games that aren't tied to the acquisition of CD-ROM boxes and floppy disks. So that's sort of where I am at. It's a project that I'm just getting going, and happy to answer any questions or hear from you all about this.